Have you ever read an LSAT argument and thought to yourself, wait, that actually makes sense? But then the question says, which one of the following, if true, most weakens the argument? And suddenly your brain's like, oh no, everything sounds right. Yeah, that's weakened questions. They sound simple. They're asking you to just find what weakens the argument. But they're actually one of the best indicators of whether you really understand logical reasoning or you're just memorizing patterns. And so today, I'm going to show you how to see the logic gap, the space between what's said and what's actually proven. That is the real key to every single weakened question. The goal is that you'll be able to spot the flaws faster, you'll see through the traps, and you'll be able to pick the one answer that actually does damage, not just sounds negative. Now, here is the simplest way to think about weakened questions. You're not trying to destroy the argument, you're just trying to make it a little bit shaky. It's like a table that has one loose screw. It still is able to stand, but it's shaky, it's wobbly. So your goal is to make the argument less convincing. And to do that, you have to understand the argument's conclusion. Specifically, for example, what is the argument's claim? What is it trying to prove? What's the conclusion? Secondly, what's the evidence? What is the reason they think it's true? And finally, what is the glue? What is the assumption connecting the two parts together? Evidence and conclusion. That glue, that connection, the assumption, that is the weak point, and that is where you strike. So when you see in a question stem, which one of the following, if true, most weakens, I want you to pause for just 2 seconds and ask yourself, what is the gap here? If you take that moment of pause and reflection, that could save you from getting hypnotized or tricked by 5 shiny wrong answers. So let's make this real. Suppose you had an argument saying you should eat at that restaurant. After all, it has 5 stars on Yelp. Seems simple enough, right? Conclusion, you should eat there. Evidence, it has 5 stars on Yelp. The assumption is that Yelp reviews accurately reflect restaurant quality. And so if we were to learn that most Yelp reviews are written by the owner's friends, that would expose the flaw. Then the link between evidence and conclusion falls apart. And that is what weakened questions do. They reveal where the logic doesn't hold together. Now, the LSAT can phrase a weakened question in a couple of different ways. They could say, for example, which one of the following, if true, calls into question the reasoning above? They could say, which one of the following, if true, undermines the argument? Or they could say, which one of the following, if true, casts doubt on the conclusion? Same job, different wording. And notice that these question stems always include the phrase, if true. That is LSAC giving you permission to assume the new information is 100% real. Even if it sounds wild or extreme, if it weakens the reasoning, it still counts. Now, there are only 3 reliable ways to weaken an argument. First would be alternative explanation. The author says one cause explains something and you show there could be another cause that fits just as well or even better. For example, if they said people who take vitamin C get fewer colds, therefore vitamin C prevents colds. What if those same people also sleep more and eat healthier? That would be a competing explanation and make the conclusion that much shakier. Second, you have irrelevant evidence, where the evidence is technically true, but it doesn't prove the conclusion. For example, this coffee shop is great because it has free Wi-Fi. Might be true, but it says nothing about the quality of the coffee itself. Then you have attacking the quality of the evidence. So when an argument relies on data like studies, surveys, or polls, you want to check the foundation. For example, was the sample biased? Were the questions leading? If the evidence is flawed, the conclusion built on it crumbles away. Now, before looking at the answers, ask yourself, is there another cause? Is the evidence irrelevant? Is the study unreliable? And 9 times out of 10, your right answer is going to hit on one of those. Now, let's talk about trap answers. The first big trap would be a strengthener disguised as a weakener, where it sounds logical, but it actually supports the argument. So you want to ask, does this make the conclusion more or less likely? If it's more, it's a trap. Then you have off-top target or irrelevant answers, where they are attacking the wrong thing. They might criticize background details or side information, but leave the core logic untouched. If it doesn't affect the link between the evidence and the conclusion, it's irrelevant. Now, weaken and strengthen are twins, just facing in opposite directions. For a weakened question, you're poking a hole in the bridge between evidence and conclusion. For a strengthened question, you are patching up that same hole in the bridge. Same structure, opposite goal. And so once you understand one, you basically understand both. Now, I want you to remember that the best weakened answers don't attack the facts, they attack the connection between the facts. So they might say essentially, sure, the evidence could be true, but it doesn't prove the conclusion. That is the subtlety I want you to recognize as a future top scorer. You're not saying that it's wrong, you're saying, nice try, but that doesn't logically follow. So your quick checklist for every weakened question is first, find the conclusion, then find the evidence, then spot the assumption, connecting them together. And finally, choose the answer that makes the assumption less likely to hold. That is the approach. That is the process. It's simple, it's structured, and it's repeatable. And once you start seeing arguments this way, it is impossible to unsee, because every new question you encounter will basically be like a remix of one you've already encountered in the past. Now, if you find yourself falling for traps, I want you to view that as being a good sign, because it means you're finally seeing the patterns. You're now just tightening your aim. And so every question that you get wrong or have difficulty with is an opportunity to learn something new. So don't think to yourself, I'm bad at this. Think to yourself, I'm building my LSAT muscles, because that is exactly what you're doing. You're training yourself to think like a lawyer. You're logical, you're skeptical, and you're precise. And so we're going to go over several LSAT drills covering weakened arguments, how to weaken arguments using your logical reasoning skills, your logical reasoning muscles,